Okay, we're back, and this is the line work I did for this stencil. And here I'm using a 5 round liner and a 9 round shader. Those are the tubes, and those are the needles. You can pause it if you need to. Now I use 4 ink caps when I'm doing a tattoo that I feel like it just has basic shading. If it's a little bit more advanced, I might have like 6 or 7 ink caps. So the first ink cap would be my darkest dark, which would be my black. The second one would be the second three, or the three after the first one will all be gray wash, but it's just 3 tones. My darkest gray wash. That goes my black. My darkest gray wash. My second darkest, which is 3 drops. 1 drop. Boom. Those are my lightest gray washes. I will just refill the rest with witch hazel. So basically I did 5 drops, 3 drops, and then 1 drop. And notice I only put witch hazel in the second 3. So the first one is just my darkest dark. That's just only black ink. So 5 drops of ink, filled it up with witch hazel. 3 drops of ink, filled it up with witch hazel. And I'm starting with my lightest one. And I always do that because when I start tatting, I want to get an idea of what my lightest gray wash looks like on this person's, in particular, this person's skin that I'm tatting, because everybody's skin is different. So I had to adjust the camera right here. So give me 1 second. I had to move it because I realized that people weren't gonna be able to see what I was doing. Well, it'll change in about a minute, so I'll just talk for a bit. But when you're doing lines, you gotta think about distance. So those light lines are usually areas where, let's say if I was doing a face, it would be like the wrinkles in the forehead or the wrinkles in the eyes or the nostril, areas that aren't really supposed to be dark. And that's a lot of mistakes that I see in tattoos. Like they'll do a face, and on the nose, they'll outline it with like black. When you really, and you'll see when I do the portrait tutorial, ambulance outside or some shit. Sorry about that. But you'll see when I do the portrait tutorial, a lot of lines are not supposed to be the same color. All right, so again, I have my lightest line out. So you can just check this out. I'll shut up for a bit. Okay, and that's a Bishop rotary I'm using. And my friend asked me, okay, how deep are you going? If you don't know how deep you should be going in the skin, you shouldn't be tattooing, because you kind of get a feel for how deep you should be going. And to give you an idea of how deep I'm going right now, I know I'm going over this line again with a darker line, so I'm not going too deep. But I have this little trick I do. I'll barely go into the skin. That way I can put some of the numbing cream on it or the Bactine. If you don't know what Bactine is, you can get it at Walgreens or CVS or pharmacy store or Walmart, because it's more useful when you use it when the skin is already broken. So if you're going to use any like anesthesia or anything with lidocaine in it that'll numb the skin, it's more useful when the skin is already broken. So I go in with a light line, or not a blood line, which is a line without ink, but just like a really light line with a lighter color. Because once you go too far, if that color's too dark, you can't get it back. So I went over to my second darkest wash, which was my middle one out of the 3, because I had the darkest gray wash, the second darkest, and then the lightest. So I rushed the process a little bit. I didn't want it to be too light. But when I start shading, you'll see I'm gonna start from light to dark. I do everything from light to dark, and based on the skin and based on the decisions I want to make, is if I feel like this tattoo should be really dark, that's how much time I take on light or dark, or getting it to that full form. Okay, so it's a good time to speak about um, distance before I really get in depth about it. But technically, that thumb is the first thing closest to the viewer. So that thumb is in closest distance. So that thumb should have the darkest outline or the most visible outline, which means in artistic terms that the first thing your eye sees is the thumb. The last thing that your eye sees is the background, which is nothing back there. So in relation to what I'm tattooing, which is the hand, the last thing your eye sees is the pinky. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, so I'm not going to outline this tattoo with black. The the closest thing to the viewer should have the darkest line, not the darkest shade. Which is why if you're looking with your actual eyes with your own vision, the closest things to you appear more vivid. They appear more sharp. The things that are further away appear more blurry, or they appear more dark or in distance. So the thumb should have the darkest outline, which I'm going to outline with my darkest gray wash, and the pinky should have the lightest outline, which I outline with the lightest gray wash. And every time you're wiping, wipe away from the stencil, wipe away from the tattoo so you don't lose your stencil. And this stencil was a lot darker in person. It's weird. I'm gonna show you. If I put my camera over here, this must have meant the first time I was doing something. So yeah, this is gonna be the first time that I dipped in the darkest gray wash. So everything was outlined with the lights. So yeah, see, it makes sense. I'm outlining the thumb with the darkest gray wash because it's in the front. So it's not gonna, you're not gonna notice it with the naked eye, but an artist should notice it. And even if you're not an artist, things read as correct when they're done correctly. So people are gonna read this tattoo as, oh, it's a good tattoo just because it was done correctly. Now again, I'm not saying that the thumb needs a black outline or the tattoo should be light. I'm saying that the tattoo needs an outline, but since the thumb is closer to the eye, it should pop out a little bit more. So it's just a very, very, very slight little tweak on it that I'm doing. And again, I have to correct myself. I outlined the rest of it with that second darkest gray wash. I just touched the little corners and like the nail on the thumb and the wrinkles in the hand with the lightest gray wash, just so I can keep it as a reminder. And that's another thing you can do. You can use round shaders or liners to remind you where to do a shade at. Just do it real light, and you can use it. It's almost like having a stencil. You see, okay, so this index finger is also close to the viewer. So it should have a much more noticeable outline. Okay, I skipped it forward a little bit so you can not get bored with watching too long. Like I said, I didn't want to make this video the exact same amount of time it took to outline this fake skin. Now, if you take a look at that middle finger, which is after the index finger, it appears to be lighter than the index finger if you look closely. And that's what I mean by reading stuff correctly, because it's further in the distance. Now I want to separate it from the ring finger. I don't know if you can notice, but that wrinkle in between the thumb and the index finger is really light. The area on the wrist with the veins are really light, but the thumb looks really dark. I'm using a 9-round shader. And this is pretty cool because this can be a guideline for where to use your mags. I'm going to be using a round mag for this, like a curved mag, but I use round shaders as where I can't actually put a sharp line where there's supposed to be a line. So like I said, a wrinkle is a good way to use a round shader. So I'll just tap that in there. That way when I actually use the mag, it won't look like a sharp line. Or when I want to shade an area that I don't think I can fit the mag in, you can shade it with a round shader. It'll look just as good. Because technically the wrinkles in your thumb or your knuckles wouldn't be a sharp line if you're thinking realistically. And you can also shade just as good with round shaders. So you can like, they call it whip shading. I'll show a little bit more in the video when I'm doing the actual shading. But this video is for lining, so I'm just showing you how you can line with a round shader. It's going to make a soft line, not a hard line like the outline of that thumb. It's making soft edges, and this is going to give you a better example. When I wipe these off, these folds on a finger, think of it like drapery, like a tablecloth. If you lift it up, the outside of it would be a line, but those folds and wrinkles would all be round shading. Or if you draw a lot, the outline of this hand would be a H pencil, but these what I'm doing now with the round shader would be a B pencil. You see that? You see the difference, the softness, the way it created a fold. That's the use of a round shader. You can, some people are skilled enough to get that with a liner, but don't make it hard, baby. Make it easy. Work smart, not hard. And I'm just making it a little bit darker to create that fold. And here, that area up there I skipped, I did it on purpose. It's a mental note I took. That's where the middle finger goes, but I want to do that with a mag, because the mag, you can turn it sideways and create another area. Because if you look at your hand, you really wouldn't cut that knuckle all the way off. You really would just turn into it a little bit if you were. The knuckle kind of just, it's a curve or a shape. Even these veins, these aren't like solid lines, so you can shade these away. You don't have to line these off. You can shade them off. I was just doing a little shading with the round shader to show areas that it can be too small to get a mag in for some people. And I'm just using, and again, I'm not using I have not touched my black ink yet. Keep in mind that I have not touched. That's very important to keep that in mind. Some people tattoo dark to light, but I tattoo light to dark. I have not touched it yet. So I'm using that. I wish I can zoom in right here, but I'm using that round shader just to shade that area. It's too small with a thumb and a nail hit, just to make a smooth shading. Now I want to get into those wrinkles where the thumb and the index finger meet. That space I just pointed to. That's why I put some A&D right there. And when you're tattooing, I always put A&D before you drop that needle in somebody's skin, because it lubricates it and it hurts less. And it's easier to tattoo because ink doesn't drip everywhere. And you can see where you're going. Because people always ask me, how do you see where you're going? But honestly, you just put some Vaseline or some A&D right there and you're going to be able to see clearly. And again, this is with a round shader, because this is smooth. If you look at your hand, these wrinkles are smooth. They're not sharp lines right there. They're smooth. And I was about to cheat over with that round shader, but I'm gonna wait for the shading video to show you how to do that with a mag. So I stopped. Yeah, this is the lining video. Portraits coming soon. Subscribe.